the Sixers might be the most polarizing team in the NBA. One night they're great, they can win the NBA title. The next night they stink, they need to fire the coach. The next night they need to trade one of their superstar players. Ben Simmons needs to be traded. Joel Embiid has to be traded. They can't play together.
Love it.
Well, we're going to try to tie it all together. 7 years working in the NBA as a video coordinator and a assistant scout with both the Wizards, the Hawks, and the Raptors. Scoutwithbryan.com is where you can find his work. On Twitter at Scoutwithbryan. Bryan Ohringer joins us now here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, welcome back to the show. How you been?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing great, man. And would you agree, as a guy who has worked in the NBA, that just watching this team, that they are a polarizing discussion?
Oh, for sure. I think as much as any team in the league, kind of like you mentioned, seems the narrative kind of shifts week by week or day by day about, do they need to trade one of the superstars? Do they fire the coach? It's as you guys know very well, it's a very demanding fan base that tends to be a little critical at times, and I think that all contributes to a lot of different perspectives on the team there.
Let's start with Ben Simmons. As you kind of broke him down the other day on Twitter at ScoutWithBryan, you put a video together saying, after putting this video together and, seeing this guy in action, you dubbed him a superstar. Well, we have people who text, call, tweet that say, he's just a guy. Why does everybody prop this guy up? What would a guy who scouted in the NBA say when you watch Ben Simmons?
Yeah, I think he just impacts the game in a tremendous number of ways, and I think people tend to just perseverate on the one way that he obviously doesn't, which is a jump shot, and it's a decent flaw, but you just look at the pace that he plays with, the way he attacks the rim, how he finishes around the basket with both hands, his offensive rebounding, his post game, his passing and transition, his defense, which has been maybe a defensive player of the year level this season. I just think you look at the way that Giannis plays in Milwaukee. Obviously, he's a little bit more of an athletic freak, and I'm not saying that Ben is him, but I do think Ben is the closest thing to Giannis in the NBA today, just in terms of being a guy that always puts pressure on the defense, is phenomenal at reading the floor and kicking out the shooters. I think he's assisted the most threes in the NBA, and I just think he's an incredibly unique player that plays on both ends and just has a tremendous motor. I think overall he's a super positive player with or without a jump shot.
Now, is it, in your mind, necessary for him to evolve a shot, or if he is merely just an aggressive player like we've seen over the last 2 weeks, is that good enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brett Brown has kind of always said that the biggest thing with Ben is playing with force, is how he words it a lot, and just keeping that pace up, attacking the basket, and if he does that, generally, I think they're close to being fine. I mean, I think over the duration of his career, if he can at least hit like a 15-footer off the dribble to make defenses have to occasionally go over a pick and roll and not be able to, go under a screen, even if it's set 10 feet away from the basket, I think that would be tremendously helpful. And I think that's honestly more important to his game than adding, say a spot up three. But I think honestly, I think the shot is very much broken, and I would be very surprised if he ever becomes, a decent volume 3-point shooter. But if he could at least add kind of a little mid-range off the dribble around the elbows, I think that could definitely be helpful.
It's interesting. He put out, or he didn't, but the people he was working with in the offseason, Bryan, put out a bunch of videos of him shooting all sorts of shots over the summer in practice and even in full court games, and he was, these were not easy shots. Now, it wasn't NBA defenses, but he was pulling up and hitting them from left, hitting them from right. But you think the shot is broken though, because in the videos we saw, he was nailing everything. So is it his technique? Is it his form? Will he never really be even what we see out of Giannis now, which isn't good, but is somewhat honest?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think a couple things there. First of all, of those 2-minute videos where you see him making everything, you got to remember there could have been 2 hours where he wasn't making everything. Right. Those are very selectively clipped fragments of pickup games. But, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I take away from that is just a good illustration. Again, just how talented and absurdly talented NBA players are that, you know, I bet you can watch him in practice and spot up shooting, and you can watch him, you know, playing pickup and things like that and shoot the ball reasonably well. But when it comes to translating it to a full-speed NBA game, I mean, yeah, I think he's, you know, my honest opinion, honestly, is that he's a right-hander who's shooting lefty, and I think that contributes to a very, very awkward shot, to say the least. So, yeah, I mean, you never say never, and ultimately, you know, his own work ethic could certainly, you know, if he puts that same amount of work in every offseason, could he have a jumper in 3-4 years? Absolutely. I just, you know, I was telling people even all offseason when I saw those videos, I just said, look, you know, it's great that he's making these in pickup, but he's not going to be shooting this at game speed in an NBA game, and, you know, he hasn't, but I still think, obviously, he's been very effective, and, you know, the Sixers on the whole for the season and play pretty well.
Do you think he impacts the game in the half-court offense as well as he does in the transition offense? Because in the playoffs, and that's what we talk about, it's really becomes more – and I know they run up and down even in the playoffs, but your half-court offense becomes that much more important.
Yeah, I think that's it's a fair criticism, and certainly something that is probably the biggest part or the biggest, you know, shortcoming of not having that jumper. But, you know, Giannis is a little bit the same way, to be honest, in the playoffs. I mean, I know teams have to respect him a little bit more from outside, but for the most part, they still play him 8-9 feet off and just beg him to take threes. And, you know, when he makes them, you just say, God, there's nothing you can do then. You know, but Giannis's best skill is still, you know, attacking in transition and drawing multiple defenders and kicking the ball out. You know, and if Ben can keep doing that in the playoffs and at a really high level, I think they'll still be okay. But, yeah, I mean, there's certainly going to be times in the playoffs where people are going to see, you know, him being wide open, him not being guarded with the ball in his hands and complain about the jumper. And I think that's kind of just the reality, you know, and it's on Brett Brown and them to just try to find a way to still make it work.
What's the biggest need right now for this team / what's going to be the downfall of this team when they get eliminated from the postseason?
Well, you know, I think there's certainly a formula for them to come out of the East, and I think they'll be right there. You know, I just ultimately think the one guy I haven't mentioned, obviously, is Embiid, you know, coming back, and he's a star and a really high-level player. But, you know, I do think some of the questions about their fit together are fair. You know, I think, honestly, I think Ben's game is more suited for the modern NBA, you know, kind of the way I talked about just how many threes he creates with the pace and energy that he plays with, you know, whereas Joel is very much a post-up guy. And, you know, he's a great post-up guy, but when you hear coaches like Carlisle even talk about how the post-up's kind of dead and, you know, how much refs let guys get banged up in the post, you know, that's a style that you don't see as much in today's NBA. So, you know, I think, as always, they just need to find a way to play together and kind of, you know, manage the two of them. But, you know, I'm not totally shocked, to be honest, that they're playing so well when it's Ben and a bunch of shooters and it's Ben and, you know, Al spacing the floor. I think Joel, honestly, to me, is the guy that needs to become a better shooter, you know, not Ben. I think it's more important for the Sixers that Joel really become a consistent, you know, three-point shooter at least, because that really, you know, helps unlock Ben's game, as you're seeing without Joel. You know, so if Joel can come back and shoot the ball at a high level, I think that's a huge key for the team.
We're talking with former NBA scout Bryan Ohringer, who you could check him out on Twitter at Scout with Bryan. Would you then, you know, look at the spacing issues this team has when Joel is on the floor? And it's something that's interesting that you just said about Joel becoming the better shooter. Do you feel that the spacing issues are a little misguided with those two guys on the floor, or is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's definitely a really odd fit. You know, it's yeah, like I said, you know, Joel's best skill is his post up. So, you know, when usually if you play with anybody in the post today in the NBA, you'd like to have four guys spaced around him on the perimeter. You know, so obviously the one time that, you know, Ben not having a shot becomes the most glaring issue is when Joel has the ball in the post. So, you know, Brett Brown's found ways to stick Ben in the dunker and do a couple creative things with him. but like I mentioned, I think it's very clear that Ben is just, not comfortable, not confident enough taking spot-up jumpers at game speed right now. And, that makes it hard, to post up Joel consistently. But, yeah, I mean, I think, I think they're at their best kind of the way they've been playing these last few games, which is kind of just, like I said, similar to the Milwaukee offense, guys in the corners, guys at the slots. Ben just, attacking the rim relentlessly, and when help comes, you kick out to Richardson and Horford and, all the shooters, and they make shots. So, it's definitely an odd fit and something they got to keep working through. But I think they still, have a really good chance to come out of the East either way.
What is your hypothesis as to why Ben, I mean, look, he's taken 2 threes. They both went in. That didn't give him any confidence at all to continue to shoot them. He shot them in Summer League. That's the one thing. When he came in as a rookie, he did shoot elbow jumpers, foul line jumpers. I mean, he did have a little perimeter game. So do you feel that he's just not confident in the shot, or that there's something else there? Because when he has shot them, he's made them, although only 2. But it's not like they're hideous-looking shots. They both went right. They both were. So do you have a reasoning as to why he doesn't even attempt any?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little odd for sure, especially when you hear, Brett Brown say things like that he wants Ben taking one a game and that he's really, empowering him to shoot and begging him to shoot, and Ben won't do it. I mean, I certainly think, yeah, there's very much a mental component to it. I think, this has become kind of such the massive elephant in the room that, maybe he just thinks, okay, if I come out in a game and miss 1 or 2, will that get in my head completely? And then our team's, it kind of just spiral from there. But yeah, I mean, I think, Zach Lowe, I think, has written about it at times. Brett, obviously, like I said, has talked about it. I think Ben, does need to just kind of let it go occasionally and give it a chance. And I think he is maybe as much in his head as anybody and just kind of kills it by not believing in it. I think a huge portion of shooting is just confidence and belief. And, if you don't have that, then obviously it's hard to be a good shooter.
Now, Brian, about a week ago, because anytime the Sixers lose, especially if it's a couple times in a row like they did on the road, Brett Brown has to go. He needs to be fired. He can't coach the team. Where you tweeted out, all the Brett Brown can't coach takes are hysterical. He's actually a much better coach than you think. Where do you kind of put the coach's importance for the team's night-to-night success, winning and losing, and how do you rank the job that Brett has done as the coach and what kind of role he has had in their wins and losses?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, it's a players' league. I think it's still it's 90% about the players. Coaches certainly have an impact, but, if you don't have stars, if you don't have a tremendous team, Frank Vogel can look like a terrible coach in Orlando and then, a great coach with LeBron and AD. So our evaluation of coaches is all messed up to start out with. But, yeah, I mean, I think Brett has done a really good job. Obviously just looking at the whole way he's evolved the team from being a 10-win team in the process and just having the patience to stick with that group and see the whole thing through to how it's evolved now to being, potentially a 60-win, 55-win team, whatever, is pretty remarkable. A part of what I said about him, honestly, is I think, he has to do as much coaching, I think, as any coach in the league. When you think about really having a point guard that can't and won't shoot, I think it's a tremendous onus on Brett to have to really, have a ton of plays, a huge playbook, a great deal of execution. I think defensively he's gotten Ben and Richardson and Thibault obviously to play at an unbelievable level defensively. And, I think that's mostly about what coaching is about, which is buy-in and getting guys to compete hard for you. And the players, for Brett Brown have always pretty much seemed to do that. And they seem to really like him and play defense for him and buy into his message. So, yeah, I mean, I think overall I'd rank him for sure as a top 10 coach in the league. And, the people that think he doesn't run an offense or doesn't run plays, whatever it is, they're just wrong. They're just not seeing it, honestly, from a guy that scouted him and done advanced scouting at his games. he's got a playbook as big as any coach in the league. It's just, again, when you have a point guard that can't shoot, it certainly limits a lot of the plays that you're able to run.
Brian, I think we all agree that, and you mentioned yourself, you think the Sixers have enough talent to compete and maybe come out of the East. But this offseason, past one, was kind of crucial for them as far as shaping the team. They made a lot of moves, out Jimmy Butler, in Al Horford. When you watch and see how they function, and I know it's been tough because they haven't had the same lineup from night to night, but was the Horford addition, which we kind of all thought would be really good, but now looks clunky at times, is that going to be something that you think may hold them back from being a better team, or will help them? Will they be able to figure it out with him on the court and the other two being Simmons and Embiid?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, personally, I think they got worse over the offseason. I think losing the alpha dog in Jimmy was a massive, huge loss. And, they recovered okay with Al. But then when you also, lose an elite shooter that I think was really crucial in JJ,
right.
I think the team got a little bit worse year to year. But no, Al's not going to hurt you no matter what. He's a really smart, high IQ player. He's, you look at his plus minuses and just the impact he has on winning. He's another guy his whole career who's been a positive. I think what's crucial to him, honestly, is kind of not being on the floor at the same time as Embiid. And that's, I think that's kind of the $1 million question, is how do they make that work with such a big lineup out there with Horford, Embiid, Simmons, and Harris on the floor at the same time. And, if you can't, I think they might just kind of have to find a way to play Ben and Horford a lot of times just together, without Embiid in the game, or play, Embiid and Horford together when Simmons is out, so you have a little more shooting from the other positions. I mean, it's definitely kind of a clunky, awkward fit at times, and I'm not sure exactly how that fit's going to work out, but I think if Brett Brown's kind of learned anything from, Embiid not being out there, is I think you kind of see that, you need to run a lot of the lineups out there with Ben and Horford together, because, when you have Horford spacing with Ben's skill set, I think it makes them both much better players.
So there's been a lot of reports, surfacing around more and more as we approach the trade deadline, Brian. Derrick Rose, that's a name that's been linked to the Philadelphia 76ers often. Is that something that makes sense in your mind? Do you think he would be a nice fit, something that could maybe get this team over the hump?
Yeah, I think he'd be a great fit there, to be honest. I think, the fact that they hold it down fine and play reasonably well with guys like Neto at the backup point guard spot is, I think a testament to the rest of that roster. And, they've found a way to use Simmons like as a five-member and as a kind of a role guy in pick and rolls. But, yeah, I mean, Derrick Rose has been great, to be honest, these last couple seasons. Really found an incredible fountain of youth. And, at the Pistons, without him this season, might have had 5 or 6 wins. I mean, he's really carried that team at an incredible level to even have them in, playoff contention. I think if they can get him, even if, it's just to be a backup point guard and, play 20 whatever minutes off the bench, he is a guy that can make a mid-range jumper, that can play a lot of pick and rolls and make guys have to occasionally go over the screen. Like Ben, he does, he's one of the fastest paced players in the league that really plays up-tempo and, fits with the style otherwise. So, yeah, I mean, if he'd be willing to come in and kind of be that backup point guard at times and, obviously find a way to be on the floor sometimes at the end of games, you certainly can't go wrong adding a guy like that.
For more from Brian, at Scout with Brian, Bryan, at Scout with Brian on Twitter, scoutwithbrian.com for more videos and breakdowns of all players throughout the league. He's a great follow on Twitter on every NBA night, and he was kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
And Bryan Ohringer, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He was a 4-year video assistant coordinator with the Raptors, Hawks, Wizards, and 4 years as a scout with both those teams. So that's a pretty good resume to talk about some of the things that we went over.